After Margaret passed, I learned that winter doesn't care if you're ready for it. The snow still comes, the walkways still need clearing, and the wood stove still needs feeding every 4 hours or the house goes cold. I was 63 years old, living alone for the first time in 40 years, and every morning felt like waking up in someone else's life. My house sat at the edge of town, where the paved roads gave way to gravel and the streetlights stopped reaching. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the road. Most days, the only sound was wind moving through the pines and the occasional truck grinding up the hill. I didn't mind the quiet at first. Grief is loud enough on its own. My routine became mechanical. Wake at 6, start the coffee, pull on the same worn boots and jacket Margaret used to tell me to replace. Clear the front walkway with the old grain shovel, check the mailbox, bring in more firewood from the covered pile on the side of the house. The driveway was gravel, so I didn't bother with it much, but the walkway to the front door needed daily attention or it would disappear under the drifts. I worked for the county road department for 30 years before I retired, so I knew snow. I knew how it fell, how it settled, how it drifted depending on the wind. It was predictable, honest in a way. You clear it, and it stays clear until the next storm. That's what I thought anyway. That's what made sense. It was mid-January when I first noticed something off. I'd cleared the front steps that morning, same as always, swept them down to bare wood, spread some sand for traction. The sky was overcast but stable, no new snow in the forecast. I went inside, had lunch, dozed off in the chair by the stove the way I'd been doing more often lately. When I got up around 2 in the afternoon to bring in more wood, I opened the front door and stopped. The steps were covered again. Not heavily, just a light, even coating, like someone had dusted them with powdered sugar, but it hadn't snowed. I stepped outside and looked up. The sky was still gray and still. No flurries, no wind to speak of. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I hadn't cleared them as well as I thought. Maybe I was more tired than I realized, and my memory was playing tricks. That's what happens when you get older, and you're alone too much. Your mind fills in gaps that aren't really there. I swept the steps again, slower this time, making sure I got down to the wood. Then I went back inside and tried not to think about it, but it sat in the back of my head all evening, a small, uncomfortable weight, like a pebble in your boot you can't quite shake loose. The next morning, I opened the door to get the newspaper from the box at the end of the walkway, and that's when I saw the footprints, a single line of them, leading straight up to the living room window, then back toward the road. They were fresh, pressed deep into the snow that had fallen overnight. Large prints. Definitely boots. Definitely not mine. I walked over to the window and looked at the ground beneath it. Whoever it was had stood there for a while. The snow was packed down solid, melted slightly from body heat, refrozen into a slick patch. I looked at the window itself. No smudges, no marks, but the curtain inside had been open. I always left it open during the day to let light in, which meant whoever stood there could see directly into my living room. I told myself it was probably someone from the county checking the power lines, or a neighbor cutting through my yard. But when I walked down to Ed's place later that afternoon and asked casually if he'd been by my house, he said no. Same with the Hendersons on the other side. Nobody admitted to being anywhere near my property. That night, I closed all the curtains before dark. I checked the locks twice, and when I finally went to bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind scrape branches against the side of the house, wondering if every sound was something else. I woke at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of scraping. Not the wind, not branches.
Something deliberate, rhythmic, like someone dragging a shovel slowly across gravel. It was coming from outside, somewhere near the side of the house. I got out of bed without turning on the lights and moved to the window. The moon was behind clouds, and the only illumination came from the faint glow of snow. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see. There was someone standing at the edge of my property, maybe 30 feet from the house, right where the yard met the tree line. A dark shape, tall and still, hands at their sides. They weren't moving, not walking, not looking around, just standing there like a fence post, facing the house. I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. I blinked, trying to focus through the dim light and falling snow. And when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. just empty space where it had been. No movement, no retreating shape disappearing into the trees, just gone. I stood at that window for another hour, sweating despite the cold, searching the darkness for any movement. Nothing. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there with the lights off, staring at the door, gripping the old aluminum baseball bat I'd kept in the closet since my son was in Little League. Morning came slow and gray. I didn't want to open the front door, but I had to. When I finally did, I found something waiting for me. On the top step, directly in front of the door, was a small stack of stones, 5 of them, each about the size of my fist, balanced perfectly, one on top of the other. They were dark gray, smooth river stones, not the kind of rocks you'd find in my yard, and they were wet, not from snow, but like they'd been pulled from water. I crouched down and reached out to touch the top stone. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and slick. I knocked the stack over, and the stones clattered down the steps and into the snow. I looked around. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, at least 2 inches, smooth and undisturbed all around the steps. No footprints leading to the door, no tracks leading away.
Just the stones, sitting there like they'd been placed by something that didn't need to touch the ground. I kicked the stones off into the yard and went back inside. My hands were shaking, not from the cold. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the door for a long time, trying to tell myself there was a logical explanation. Wind didn't stack stones. Animals didn't stack stones. Someone had been here. But how they got here and left without leaving a single mark in fresh snow, I had no answer for that. I drove into town that afternoon and went to the police station. The officer at the desk listened politely while I explained. The footprints, the figure in the yard, the stones. He took notes, asked a few questions, told me they'd send a patrol car by to check the area. 2 days later, the deputy stopped by. Young guy, mid-20s, polite enough. He walked around the property, looked at the tree line, checked the windows. He didn't find anything. No evidence of trespassing, no signs of disturbance. He told me it was probably kids messing around, maybe someone playing a prank because they knew I lived alone. He said they'd keep an eye out, drive by more often. I nodded and thanked him, but I could see it in his face. He didn't take it seriously. To him, I was just an old man living alone in the woods, jumping at shadows, letting my imagination get the better of me. After he left, I stood in my driveway and looked at the trees. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised more snow. I realized then that no one was going to help me. Whatever this was, whoever this was, I was dealing with it on my own. I went back inside, locked the door, and started thinking about what I could do to protect myself. I went back to the hardware store in town and bought a trail camera, the kind hunters use. It wasn't fancy, but it had motion detection and night vision. I mounted it on the porch overhang, angled down toward the front door and steps. If someone came back, I'd have proof. That night, I left the camera running and tried to sleep. I didn't. I sat in the living room with all the lights off, watching the window, listening to every creak and groan of the house settling. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the faint mechanical click of the camera activating. My stomach dropped. In the morning, I pulled the memory card and loaded it onto my old laptop. There were 3 files. I opened the first one. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. The video showed the front steps, clear and still, illuminated by the camera's infrared. Then, at the edge of the frame, a figure stepped into view. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark coat and boots. He walked up to the bottom of the steps, then stopped. For 11 minutes, he stood there, absolutely motionless, staring directly at the camera. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes dark and sunken. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. Then, at the end of the clip, he began walking backward, away from the steps,
still facing the camera, until he disappeared into the darkness beyond the infrared's reach. The video ended. I sat there staring at the frozen final frame, my mouth dry, my hands cold. I didn't recognize him. I'd never seen him before in my life. I couldn't stay in that house and pretend everything was normal. I reinforced the door with a tame lock and a security bar. I moved a chair in front of it. I kept every light in the house burning all night. I stopped going to bed. I sat in the living room with the baseball bat across my lap, the phone on the table beside me, waiting. Around midnight, I heard them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the snow outside. They started at the front of the house, then moved along the side. I got up and went to the window, staying back from the glass, trying to see. No shape, no movement, just darkness and falling snow. But the footsteps continued. I could hear them clearly, circling the house, moving around the back, then along the other side. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the back door, unlocked it, threw it open, and shone the light out into the yard. No one. But the moment I stepped back inside and closed the door, the footsteps resumed. Slow. Methodical. Always just out of sight. I called the police again.
They said they'd send someone. I waited. The footsteps stopped just before the patrol car arrived 20 minutes later. The deputy walked around the property with his flashlight, checked the perimeter, found nothing. He looked at me the way people look at someone who's losing it. He told me to try to get some rest. Then he left. The moment his taillights disappeared down the road, the footsteps started again. I didn't sleep. I sat in that chair until the sky began to lighten, pale gray filtering through the windows. When the footsteps finally stopped, I waited another hour before I opened the front door. The word was written in the snow on the walkway, directly in front of the steps. 4 letters, carved deep into the surface with a finger or a stick. Soon. The letters were precise, deliberate, each one about a foot tall. Whoever wrote it had taken their time. I stood there staring at it, my breath fogging in the cold. My chest felt tight. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, then called the police again. I told them what I'd found, told them I had proof this time. By the time the patrol car arrived 30 minutes later, fresh snow had started falling. Light, steady flakes that covered everything. By the time the deputy got out of his car and walked up to the house, the word was already half obscured, the letters blurred and fading under the fresh powder. He looked at my phone, looked at the walkway, then looked at me. He said he believed I'd seen something, but without physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do. He said to keep calling if anything else happened. I stood in the doorway and watched the snowfall, erasing the last traces of the word, erasing any proof that someone had been there at all. I realized then that no one was going to stop this. Whatever was happening, it was going to keep happening until it reached whatever end it was moving toward. I called my sister in Portland that afternoon, told her I needed to get away for a while, that the house was getting to me. She didn't ask questions, just said to come whenever I was ready.
I packed a bag, threw it in the back seat of my truck, and decided I'd leave first thing in the morning. But that night, I couldn't wait. I couldn't spend another hour in that house, listening, waiting. Around 10 p.m., I grabbed my keys, pulled on my coat, and went out to the truck. The driveway was covered in a few inches of fresh snow, but the truck had 4-wheel drive. I'd make it to the main road fine. I opened the driver's door, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat, and climbed in. I put the key in the ignition, and that's when I looked up. He was standing at the end of the driveway, just standing there, blocking the path to the road. Tall, dark coat, hands at his sides, same as before. Except this time he wasn't at the edge of the property. He was right there, in my way, between me and any chance I had of leaving. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, he started walking toward the truck. Not fast, not rushing, just a calm, measured walk, like he had all the time in the world, like he knew I wasn't going anywhere. I hit the lock button, all 4 doors clicked shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The figure kept coming, steady, deliberate, his boots crunching through the snow. In the dim light from the porch, I could finally see his face. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes dark and hollow, like empty sockets filled with shadow. No expression, no emotion, just blank, empty focus. He reached the driver's side door and stopped. For a moment, he stood there, looking down at me through the window. Then slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his face against the glass. His breath didn't fog the window. His skin looked cold, drained of color, almost gray. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass, silent and deliberate, over and over. "Let me in, let me in." I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something shift inside me, something primal and screaming that knew, beyond any doubt, that if I opened that door, I wouldn't survive the night.
My hand shot to the steering wheel, and I slammed my palm down on the horn. The sound split the night, loud and blaring and continuous. I held it down, leaning into it with all my weight, filling the silence with noise. A light came on across the street, then another. The Hendersons' porch light flickered to life. I kept my hand on the horn, didn't let up, the sound tearing through the cold air. The figure pulled back from the window, slowly. He turned his head toward the Henderson house, then stepped away from the truck. But he didn't run. He walked backward, the same way he had in the camera footage, never turning his back, his eyes still on me, until the darkness between the trees swallowed him whole. A moment later, Bill Henderson came outside in his bathrobe and boots, squinting against the porch light. He called out, asking if everything was okay. I rolled down the window, barely able to form words. My hand shot to the steering wheel, and I slammed my palm down on the horn. The sound split the night, loud and blaring and continuous. I held it down, leaning into it with all my weight, filling the silence with noise. A light came on across the street, then another. The Hendersons' porch light flickered to life. I kept my hand on the horn, didn't let up, the sound tearing through the cold air. The figure pulled back from the window, slowly. He turned his head toward the Henderson house, then stepped away from the truck. But he didn't run. He walked backward, the same way he had in the camera footage, never turning his back, his eyes still on me, until the darkness between the trees swallowed him whole. A moment later, Bill Henderson came outside in his bathrobe and boots, squinting against the porch light. He called out, asking if everything was okay. I rolled down the window, barely able to form words, and told him someone had been in my driveway. He came over, looked around, saw the footprints leading to the truck and then toward the woods. He pulled out his phone and called the police. By the time the deputy arrived, I was sitting in Bill's kitchen with a blanket around my shoulders, shaking so hard I couldn't hold a cup of coffee. Bill stayed with me. He told the deputy everything he'd heard and seen. This time, they took it seriously. They brought dogs. They followed the footprints into the woods. The tracks led deep into the trees, winding through underbrush and over a frozen creek until they reached an old hunting cabin about half a mile from my property. The door was unlocked. Inside, the police found a space that had been lived in recently. A sleeping bag on the floor, empty cans of food, a camp stove. And on the walls, pinned up with thumbtacks, were photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of my house, taken from different angles, different times of day. My front door, my windows, my truck in the driveway. Some were taken from close range, just a few feet from the glass. Others from deeper in the woods, zoomed in with a long lens. The oldest ones were dated from early December.
He'd been watching me for over a month. But when the police searched the cabin and the surrounding area, they didn't find him. No sign of where he'd gone. The tracks leading away from the cabin disappeared into a stretch of rocky ground where snow couldn't settle. They brought in more officers, searched for 2 days, but found nothing. No identification, no vehicle, no name. Just the photographs and the evidence that someone had been there, watching, waiting. The case stayed open, but it went cold fast. Without a suspect, without a name, there was nothing they could do except file a report and tell me to stay vigilant. I didn't go back to that house. I couldn't. My sister let me stay with her for a few weeks, and then I found a small apartment in town on the second floor of a building with good locks and neighbors close by. I sold the house within 2 months. Took a loss on it, but I didn't care. I just needed it gone. For a long time, I couldn't sleep without checking the windows, couldn't leave a curtain open after dark, couldn't hear footsteps outside without my chest tightening. The sound of snow crunching underfoot still makes me stop and listen. Winter used to be just another season. Now it feels like exposure, like being watched. The police never found him. The case is still technically open, but I don't expect answers. Sometimes people slip through the cracks, and whatever he wanted from me, whatever end he was moving toward, it stayed unfinished. At least I hope it did.
I tell myself I got away before it could happen. Most days I believe that. Years have passed now. I live in a different town, farther from the woods, closer to people. I keep the lights on at night. I don't go outside after dark unless I have to. People tell me I'm cautious. I don't correct them. Last winter, I was walking back to my apartment from the grocery store. It was snowing, that same heavy, silent snowfall that muffles everything. I stopped at the corner to wait for the light, and that's when I saw him.
A figure standing across the street, half obscured by the falling snow. Tall, dark coat, hands at his sides. Just standing there, facing me. The light changed. People walked past me. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Maybe it was never there. Maybe my mind filled in something that wasn't real. But my hands were shaking when I got back to my apartment, and I locked the door 3 times before I felt safe enough to sit down. Snow keeps falling. Winter keeps coming. And every time it does, I find myself standing at the window, watching the street below, searching the spaces between the streetlights, waiting to see if he's still out there. Still watching. Still waiting for whatever it was he wanted to finish.